Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today we were with our friend Adam Greenfader, and he's got a book coming out, or it's out now actually. Why Puerto Rico? Is it Why Puerto Rico Now, Adam? Or just Why Puerto Rico?
Yeah. Why Puerto Rico Now?
Why Puerto Rico Now, and it is really a good book. And I've seen Adam give his presentation on Why Puerto Rico Now a couple of times, and it gives me hope for the future of the island of Puerto Rico. Every time I see it, I come away feeling really positive about what's happening on the island. So we're going to dive into that. And guys, we're also going to talk about in this Zoom call, we're going to talk about why Adam and I believe that there is some insulation from whatever you want to call what's happening next year with 2023 economy, whether it's some kind of a recession, mild or hard, or some sort of inflation or whatever. But we think that there is reason to be hopeful and reason that things are going to continue to be good in Puerto Rico for the immediate future and beyond. And so, Adam, with that, thank you for coming on and speaking with us. And let's just get started. You want to tell everybody about yourself, a little bit about your background, and then we'll jump right into why Puerto Rico.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Thank you, Robbie, and Adan, who's on the line as well. Actually, my shout out goes right directly back to you guys, because even though I've been at several of your events, it really is about you, Robbie, and your team, and the people that you circle yourself with, who come to Puerto Rico, who have hope, who have aspirations, who hire people, who buy properties, who are really making our island a better place. So from my perspective, it really gives me a lot of hope to see groups like yourself in Puerto Rico and being active in Puerto Rico. I mean, I see your chats. I see that you use local suppliers, that you're constantly bringing a lot of the locals into the deals. And if they're not actually partners, they're suppliers, they're architects, engineers, landscapers, painters. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, this is a real life example of jobs being created for a better Puerto Rico. And it's really about your group doing that. So, from my perspective, I'm just a guy who wrote a book, and my background's pretty simple. I lived in Puerto Rico for 25 years, married a Puerto Rican woman, wonderful woman, raised my 2 kids, and still have family and a lot of business in Puerto Rico. I'm based in Miami. I chair AG&T, which is a real estate development and advisory company. We're based in Miami. We do work all throughout the Caribbean, which is great, because really, when you work in the Caribbean, you can compare and contrast, and you can see kind of how Puerto Rico stands heads and shoulders above most islands in the Caribbean, even including some of the countries in Central and Latin America. So I'm very excited to be here with you guys. I also chair the Caribbean Council at the Urban Land Institute, ULI, and we will be having a large Puerto Rico symposium next year in May. So we expect a lot of people to be coming down to the island and joining you guys, and hopefully making Puerto Rico a better place.
Wow, that's incredible. That's great. So I'll definitely plan to attend your symposium, and thank you for the shout out. And it's really, I just want to hit on something you said. It is our heart's desire to employ people and to raise wages, and just, I don't know, do our part, right? We get to live in this island paradise, and when you live somewhere, I think that you should try to be a positive, or a plus and not a minus, right? So it's been, for the last 5 years that we've been here, our desire to leave the island better than we found it, and to be a positive force. Hopefully we're giving people higher wages, and we've got there's not been one deal that we've done on the island that we haven't partnered with many people from the island, whether that's attorneys or contractors or designers. I mean, so we've brought some partners from the States, but really the vast majority of what we've done in Puerto Rico has been, and the reason that we're successful, and the reason for the channel, is because we expand through partnerships. And a big part of that is that we partner with the locals here on the island. And there is a massive talent pool in Puerto Rico, and it's getting bigger every day too. I think part of what you're going to talk about with why Puerto Rico Now is why people will be coming back to the island. Why people who left the island for opportunity for years and years, maybe over a decade, now are coming back to the island, and there is opportunity here for the first time in something like over a decade. So, yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Adam.
Well, you can feel the hope, and you can see the progress. And when I wrote this book, part of what I was looking to do, why Puerto Rico Now, was to give people hope and to really talk to everybody, both that lives on the island, but as well as the 5 million plus Puerto Ricans and other people that are interested in Puerto Rico that don't live in Puerto Rico. And I've been thinking maybe it's time to come back. Maybe it's time to reinvest in the island. And so the book basically takes a three-pronged approach. I look at the history starting in 1898, then go into the present and look at the future. And I thought it was really important to kind of look at Puerto Rico from a purely economic and business perspective. I didn't want to get political. This book is great for everybody and anybody, because it really talks about, how to make Puerto Rico economically independent, economically strong. And so they say that if you want to look to the future, you've got to understand the past so you don't repeat some of those mistakes. So I started to look at the past. And from a very interesting perspective, starting in 1898 with the relationship between Spain and then the transfer to the United States. As we all know, that happened in the Spanish-American War. And kind of what happened with the economy. How did zoning change? How did the introduction of the dollar from the peseta change things? And then ultimately the introduction of sugar cane. So the past is, I think, has a lot of lessons. And but more importantly, why Puerto Rico Now is about the future and new and innovative suggestions for the future.
Care about the island. It's a quick, fast read too. Like I read it on the plane trip from San Juan to Orlando, and I read every word in the few hours I had. So that it was just something. Once I started, I couldn't put it down. So it was really cool. I like history though. You do a great job of educating anyone who reads it about the history of the island, and I think also you paint a really bright future for the island. So, and I think that's what is so exciting, right? Is that there is a super bright future for the island of Puerto Rico, and this is a really new development. And Adam, you've been here, and Adan, you've been here, and maybe we can speak about that. That for over 10 years, we were in the island of Puerto Rico was in a recession, a full-on depression, maybe even you would call it, ever since 2008. So what are your thoughts on that, guys?
Well, from my perspective, and Adan, thank you so much for your words. I mean, this really is about future generations. And, what we want to do is we want to learn from the past so we don't make the same mistakes. And, we're able to go forward. So for me, hearing, Adan, what you said is really dear to my heart. And, the island of Puerto Rico today has gone through those 10 plus years of economic depression, which is negative economic growth for more than 4 quarters. It had 48 quarters of negative economic growth. So there's really been this pent up demand. And very little construction. Construction on the island was averaging about 10,000 new homes a year. And for the last 15 years, it's been less than 1,000. I think the number is about 750. And the rest of the economy just has been, was devastated. And so today, we've got this hope because we see that the island is progressing. We're seeing this is going to be the first year of positive economic growth, the first year of ingress of people. Population of Puerto Rico is growing. I mean, I know so many people that are coming back to the island, which was unheard of a few years ago. And then we're also seeing this whole post-COVID pandemic, which Robbie, you and I were talking about it. Puerto Rico is about to receive the largest amount of relief and economic growth funding in its history. It's $80 billion of funding that's coming into the island. So from just a purely economic perspective, we're living in historic times. And so I'm very excited about that.
How much of that money has already come to the island over the last 5 years since Maria? Do you have any stats on that, or do you know? I know also then there's a new fresh set from the last hurricane that we just had a few months ago that will come as well. So I believe there's another $50 billion that's going to come to help with the infrastructure and to help rebuild the island. So do you have any idea how much of this, I don't know, what do you call it? It's I don't want to call it bailout, but it's recovery money from a hurricane. And by the way, this isn't just unique to Puerto Rico, right? Like wherever a hurricane goes, the federal government then comes in and there's a hurricane cycle. It's about a 5-year cycle, and we were right in line with where we should have been in Puerto Rico after Maria. And now we have another hurricane, so new 5-year cycle. So I'm thinking there's going to be something like a hurricane super cycle, because I don't think all of the money from the first hurricane has arrived. And now there's a fresh new set of money coming to improve the island. So do you have idea on what's come already versus what's still to come?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very well said. Puerto Rico is part of the United States. Everybody in Puerto Rico is an American. Everybody has a U.S. passport, U.S. dollar. All the federal laws and courts in Puerto Rico exist. And so when there is a hurricane, Puerto Rico, like the rest of the states, does receive federal funding. Out of the 80 billion or so, money has been slow. I mean, it's, rightly so. There's people frustrated with the process, but it's slow in any state. So the numbers that we've been hearing is about 15 billion has already been allocated to the island. That's working its way through the system. That's money that's starting for infrastructure, housing, electrical grid rebuilding. So we're really expecting another $60+ billion to come in the next, 0 to 5 years. And that, again, is historic. These are record amounts of money that are coming in. And I think what's really more important is Puerto Rico by 2040 has 100% renewable energy mandate. So essentially the money's coming in to rebuild Puerto Rico better. We're not talking about putting patchwork on the electrical grid, but really building new type of electrical systems and microgrids. And that is a big, big win for the island, because essentially if Puerto Rico can generate its own electricity, or a good part of it, that's going to mean that Puerto Rico will become stronger economically in all sectors. As everybody knows, Puerto Rico's electricity is about 33 cents a kilowatt hour, which is about 3 to 4 times larger than higher than in the States. So by reducing that electrical cost, it's really going to help Puerto Rico position itself for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's great that it's going to just take this massive leap forward. And I can speak to, as an investor developer, the one thing that we have pointed to for 5 years since we came to the island, when someone says, "Hey, how is it working in Puerto Rico?" The one thing that we always say is that it's unexpectedly difficult to deal with power. That has been the thorn in our side from the first day that we got here, and it has lasted till today. So I look forward to the day that won't be the case. But it is really expensive, and the power grid hasn't been great, but it is going to have this massive upgrade. So, and the island's going to experience some other upgrades as well along the way with technology. So maybe we can talk about this technological boom that's about to happen, maybe with the blockchain, the power grid certainly, but we are going to leapfrog from basically Puerto Rico's technology is somewhere capped in the mid 80s or something in a lot of parts of it, right? And we're going to have this massive technological growth over the next few years, which is going to be impressive. And I know you are excited about the blockchain, as am I. You want to speak about that a little bit, Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we all understand, Puerto Rico's electrical grid is being renovated. We're expecting big things. We're expecting this to have a huge kind of anti-Jones Act effect, because if you produce all your energy in Puerto Rico. You don't need to ship it in, right? Currently, Puerto Rico today ships in about 90% of all its energy. So getting to that level, getting past that, it's going to open up Puerto Rico to huge amounts of growth. And I think a lot of people don't realize that besides the electrical grid, almost everything else in Puerto Rico's infrastructure is grade A, absolutely fantastic. You arrive at this beautiful modern airport, you've got the great roads, you've got good private schools, you've got good other infrastructure. And when it comes to internet, Puerto Rico has one of the best 5G infrastructures in all of the Caribbean. Puerto Rico in the late 2000s got this huge pipe of technology that came into Banco Popular, and it's been driving broadband and innovation for a long time. The telephone company is private, which has created a lot of innovation on the telecoms. And so we're expecting Puerto Rico, just because of its infrastructure, to really be positioned well for the next 15, 20 years. On top of that, there's a lot of talk about satellite communications being the future, to be able to fast forward everything that has to do with 5G and smart cities and the Internet of Things. So Puerto Rico obviously has a very strong positioning when it comes to being able to launch satellites. Roosevelt Roads is one of the sites that always comes up in the conversation as being the ideal site in North America to launch telecommunications. So I think that's very good. And then the kind of the elephant in the room, so to speak, is Act 2022 when it comes to technology. Act 2022, as everybody knows, is a tax incentive to be able to come to Puerto Rico and live for all intents and purposes without paying any capital gains. But no one really realized that this would create this kind of technology hub with people moving down to the island who really have a high expertise in whether it's blockchain, Bitcoin, fintech, real tech. So we have a bunch of individuals with a lot of gray matter, and I talk about that a lot in the book, Why Puerto Rico Now, is how this group is going to eventually change kind of the composition of Puerto Rico's economy for the future, kind of a hedge against inflation, so to speak. And I think that what's really interesting is if you put enough smart people in a room, you're eventually going to come up with things that you can't even imagine. And so Robbie and I know we were talking a lot about, can Puerto Rico protect itself better than, or at least equivalent to, the rest of the United States and other places in the years to come, 2023 that everybody's talking about. And I'm very hopeful that we're going to have a lot of ways that Puerto Rico is going to bolster itself from inflation type situations.
Yeah, I think part of it is just the massive amount of money that's coming to the island from the stuff we talked about just a few minutes ago from these hurricanes. But also Act 2022 is bringing, honestly, piles of money and smart people to the island. The amount of brain power that's on the island is really special. Like I believe it like that. I would say it like this. I think that 25 years from now, I really believe this in my heart, that 25 years from now, people will look back on the island of Puerto Rico and say, I can't believe, those 10 people were all on that small island at this time, and look at what they did to change the world. And I don't know who the 10 are. I just think that they're, it's probably not me. Maybe it's Adam.
I think it's you, Robbie. I think it's you.
I doubt that it's me, but I think there are 10 people here that are going to change the world. And there are more than that here that are taking bold initiatives to try to do things to change the world. So that is, I can't wait to be able to look back on it 20, 25 years from now and say, wow, I can't believe I was there. And, this guy was doing that, and that guy and this girl, and they just changed the world. They did so much good for the world. And that's what we have in Puerto Rico right now. And hopefully we will continue to have people coming back to the island. So the island is seeing positive growth in population, and we are seeing people who left the island for opportunity come back. I met with a guy last night who's kind of come back to the island, and he had left 15, 20 years ago, and now his dream is to come back and have a business here. And so I hear that story again and again. And that's what I think is exciting, and one of the reasons that I think we have some insulation from whatever goes on in the States.
Yeah, Repopulating Paradise is one of the chapters in my book. It's called Repopulating Paradise. How can paradise not be repopulated? And if you know anything about why Puerto Ricans left, it's not because they don't like the beautiful beaches, the great culture, the amazing food, the wonderful Christmas time that lasts for 45 days in Puerto Rico. You know, Puerto Ricans love the island, and the only reason that 500,000+ people left was because they just didn't have work, or the work wasn't there. So I am totally confident when the work comes back, the people will be back, and there's a historical basis from it. In the book, I looked at 3 or 4 different periods in Puerto Rico's history where it lost 500,000 people. In one of the instances, right after World War II, the government actually paid for Puerto Ricans to leave because they didn't have enough work for them on the island, which is incredible. So this moving to the States and back, you know, migration, because it's Puerto Ricans or Americans, migrating from one place to another is pretty normal, part of the history. So yeah, I definitely think it's going to come back. And I think that, you know, whenever you put these smart people in a room together, you get great things. Again, from the history, Puerto Rico in the 1960s and 70s brought in a whole bunch of Cubans to the island. And at first there was a little bit of pushback. Oh, the Cubans are taking our jobs, blah, 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 blah. But long story short, the Cubans changed Puerto Rico's physical infrastructure to what it looks like today. Almost all of the buildings you see in Condado and Santurce were built by a select group of people in that very short period of time. So absolutely, I know that this group of Act 2022 people who are coming with new technologies, who are bringing international foreign entities, who are bringing lots of new jobs to the island and thinking, I am confident that they're going to look back and go, Robbie Kraber and that group, they changed Puerto Rico for the better.
I doubt I'll get mentioned, but hopefully we can document it on YouTube, right? Maybe I'll get to interview some of these brilliant people one day. And you're part of that group. I know that you take a lot of steps to put people in the room. I haven't been part of those conversations, but I know that you've started to have the conversation where you're putting the smart people in the room and trying to figure out what's the direction to go forward. Like, so something to Puerto Rico, it's unique to the island that we have a problem with water, and you talk about it in the book, and somebody's going to figure it out, how we can deal with nature. Anyone who thinks that that there's not a shift in the way that the waters are rising and things like that just needs to come and look at the coastline of Puerto Rico and look at some satellite photos from a few years ago, even to what it's changed to. So there's a need for that, and you talk about it in the book, and you want to kind of speak to that a little bit, Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Puerto Rico, like Florida, like New York, like California, like almost any place that's surrounded by water that has coasts, is living in a challenging time. And I think that for all of us who have kind of, you know, lived in Puerto Rico, you know, we see it. I was an Ocean Park resident for 25 years. If you've ever seen a satellite picture of Puntas Las Marias, it was called a punta because it looked like the state of Florida. Today, it looks like a nub, right? So we've seen the beaches eroded. And I think it's part of what the challenge that we have today in most of the world, not just Puerto Rico, including Florida, is we kind of have an approach towards water that is kind of like, let's keep the water over there and we will build here and we'll just build further away. And initially that was kind of the way I thought about it. But after talking to a lot of experts, and I've traveled the world to kind of learn about this subject, I had a meeting in Amsterdam, for example, at the ULI Water Symposium, where we actually talked to a water ambassador, Henk Ovink, who's actually a designated water ambassador for the country of Amsterdam. And he says, Adam, it's not about pushing the water back. It's about bringing the water in. And so I think that part of what our zoning on the island needs to start to address is what does our zoning look like? Not at the water line, la línea marítima terrestre, as they say in Spanish, but what's it look like 100 meters out? And who's responsible for that? And how do we buffer our coasts 100 meters out, not at the water line? And I think when you start asking yourself those kind of questions and start learning and start to see what we can do with reef building and what we can do with mangrove forestation and what we can do with the creation of land and water on the inside, it really kind of changes the paradigm. And I think that ultimately is going to be the solution for island nations like Puerto Rico in the Caribbean, as well as the state of Florida, that really needs to redefine how we deal with water.
I mean, we're either going to figure it out or we're going to have a smaller island. You're either going to figure it out or Miami is going to suffer greatly, right? I mean, so I believe you're right. I think that it is time that we start to adjust what happens in the maritime zone and how we invite the water in versus trying to just pretend like it's not happening, right? Like, so at Puntas Las Marias, to your point, there's no beach anymore, right? There's a seawall there in most parts, and the water comes up to the seawall and it's 4 feet deep. And if you look at the satellite pictures, it was 100 yards of beachfront, what, 10 years ago? It wasn't that long ago, is my point. It was, Maria definitely shifted the shoreline in a lot of part of the islands, but before that, I have a property in Rincon that we have about 20 yards of beachfront between us and buildings. And years ago, there was a baseball field where now the ocean is. And I'm not talking about 100 years ago. I'm talking about 25, 30 years ago. The home run was to hit the ball into the ocean. Now you can't get to first base without being in the ocean on that baseball field, right? So it's definitely a paradigm shift in the seas. I guess that's the right word for it. There's a shift, though. So what other parts of the book do you want to hit on? And how do we get the book?
Yeah, just to kind of finish on the topic of water. And I talk about this in the last chapters of the book. So the book goes from the past, which is about 20%, modern day, which is another 20% of the book. So the 60% of the book talks about the future. And, nobody really has a proverbial crystal ball. I mean, you can talk about the future and kind of say, hey, I think these things are short term, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 7 years. But then there's that kind of magical mystery sauce future where you say, what will the confluence of 1 or 2 or 3 new technologies do? And I always use the example of Uber. If you didn't have a cell phone proliferation, right? If people didn't all have cell phones, you wouldn't have Uber, but you also needed GPS, right? So it was the combination of having cell phones and GPS that created this brand new industry with thousands of jobs being created. And so those are kind of like, when I look at in Why Puerto Rico Now, when we look at the future, a lot of the suggestions are forward looking that we can say, okay, I believe that'll work. But some of them are also going to need to be kind of contingent on 1 or 2 or 3 more technologies. And really what I think the goal is for all of us when reading Why Puerto Rico Now is to be able to find new revenues. The secret is going to be, how are we going to pay for these things? For example, on the climate change and the water, how are we going to pay for us figuring out how we're going to build our reefs better, how we're going to increase the mangroves, how we're going to allow the water to come in and raise the streets? And so in figuring out how you're going to pay for it, it really has to come from new revenue streams. It's not about taxing people more, and it's certainly not about having people leave the island because they can't live on the land. So we got to find new ways to pay for it. And I'm very hopeful that the new technologies like blockchain specifically are going to be able to do something that we have been touching on, but not really been able to fully manifest. And that is called rewarding those that contribute. Rewarding those that contribute is really a concept that's based on, how do people that add value to our real estate or to our communities, how do they get paid? How can they make money? And so I'm very excited about the ability for us to be able to take new revenue streams that currently don't exist and be able to really bolster, both our hardened assets, like the physical part, the buildings, the roads, the streets, the mangroves, but also the soft assets, the legal infrastructure, the homeowners associations. In Puerto Rico, about 90% of all our buildings are over 40 years. And also that same number, almost all of the buildings in Puerto Rico, they don't have enough money to pay for major repairs that are imminent, right? That are needed. We saw this in Surfside in Florida, right? We saw a building that took them 3 years to raise the money. And the day that the contractors arrived was the day the building fell, right? 3 years. Which was a terrible situation. And we don't want that happening in Puerto Rico. So I think that what we have is the ability to use new revenues, new technologies to make our communities stronger. The book is available on Amazon. You can get it either in hardback, paper book, Kindle. And then for anybody who's kind of under the age of 30, because every time this book is written for you. It's written for people that don't have time, are young, but want to change the world. You can also do audio. So if you don't mind listening to me, you can go 2.0 or 2.5 velocity. You can listen to the book in about an hour and a half. go for it.
You already talk fast, Adam, so they might be able to do it in an hour and a half if they put it on twice the speed. I don't know. That's great. Well, we'll certainly have a link below where people can connect with you and can connect with getting the book. And I wanna buy 10 copies of the book, Adam, and give them out to some people for Christmas and things like that. So I'll do that. I'll need to figure out. I'll go in and you'll ship them to me in Florida, probably. That's what I'm thinking.
Books available. I've had people in Puerto Rico, purchase some for Christmas as well, and they bought them for their friends. And really, what the goal is, Robbie, is to have a conversation. I don't have all the answers. I don't think anyone does. But I think that if we keep talking and we stay hopeful on kind of what the future is going to look like for Puerto Rico, then that's how change happens. So, I really appreciate you giving me the time to speak with you today. And Adan, I know he's on this call as well. And, just thank you for keeping everything moving forward.